Hey there, it's Tom Jordan. It is a new year. So nice to have you back with us. And in a new year, and for most states in this great country in which we live, that means a new legislative session begins. Some of these states have already began, believe it or not, their legislative session. Most will kick off this month. And for the state of Michigan, it all begins on January the 8th, in just 5 days from today. And there's a lot of issues that are going to be brought up again, a lot of issues that have been brought up in the last lame duck session. And there's this new mixed power structure that's going to be kicking off on the 8th of January. There's a divided Congress, if you will. The Republican Party will hold the majority again back in the House, breaking that trifecta that the Democrats have been bragging about, a very slim majority that the Democrats have held for the past 2 years. They still maintain the majority in the Senate, and of course, we have a Democratic governor as well for at least 2 more years until 2020, 2026, 2027, when she leaves. But the past 2 years under that guy's leadership in the House, and of course the Senate leadership under Democrats, have been rough. With a very slim majority, the Democratic Party has radically shifted the state to the far left. And the end of 2024 ended with some legislative failures, with this urgent need for principled, results driven leadership as Republicans prepare to reclaim the House majority in 2025. And over the past term, the Democrats, pushing all these misguided policies and delaying critical reforms that could have improved accountability and protected taxpayers. Instead, they did the opposite, as they often do. They say one thing and do something entirely different. And this lame duck was just an example of how they were so power hungry, trying to cram through like 181 different bills in a 1 week period of time. So extreme were so many of these policies that even many Democrats decided not to show up to vote. And of course, courageously, Republicans decided to do the same thing, not show up. And then there was Karen Whitsett, a Democrat, who sat out as well. So they couldn't have a quorum to finalize the end of that lame duck session. And that took some courage. And of course, there's different reasons why they all did that. But safe to say, it was because of a very extreme policy agenda that the Democrats are trying to ram down our throats. Very unpopular as well with Michigan citizenry, the population in the state. But they had to get them through because they're going to be out of power come 5 days from now. We'll talk about just a few of the many new laws going into effect. Like there's a few of them. But we're also going to talk about the broader issue of individual civil liberties. And why is that constantly under threat by these special interests who have their thumb on essentially on the power, basically, power structure in the state of Michigan? There's reckless subsidy programs. There's all these hundreds of millions of dollars going to the General Motors, for example. No job guarantees and all this. Fiscal responsibility has gone out the window, and there's this attack on parental rights and freedoms, and how the state shields secret donors and perpetuates a culture of corruption. So we're going to get into that. Jason Woolford is going to join me. He's an incoming state representative, a Republican. Finally, he gets in, and it's a good thing, too. We'll talk with him just a few seconds from right now. Also, just a reminder to chime in. Comment, ask questions in the comment sections, and I'll get to those in a moment. You could ask Jason Woolford questions as well. We'll put him on the spot and see how he does on that, but I'll be here as well to answer those questions too. And a reminder, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe, click the notification bell, and save and share the content with others. That's a huge help to us. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, so the GOP, what should be the priorities for a 2025 GOP-controlled House session? How can individual parental rights be restored in schools and their health care decisions and you name it, without fear of retribution from maybe the state's attorney general or whatever, what have you. And what about transparency? Despite promises to be more transparent, the reverse has occurred under House Speaker Joe Tate with his reluctance to implement transparency, legislation, and will that change under the GOP? We hope so. Let's bring in the incoming representative, Jason Woolford, joining me now live here in the studio. Jason, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too. Glad to be here.
Congratulations on your win. This is great. It's wonderful, and I'm glad that you've retaken the House. As you're going in, I know January 8th is the beginning of the session.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. So, what are your priorities going in?
Well, I think our priorities are exactly what I talked about on the campaign trail. I said time and time again that the government is not our God, the government's not our physician, and the government's not the parent to our children. We've seen time and time again the overreach and overregulation of our government. When we look at a government that's out of control, we have an economic crisis, and as you mentioned, our women and children are under attack. And it's time for us as a majority in the House to bring oversight. And I know that that's one of the passions and compassions of the new speaker coming in. And I'm looking forward to joining that fight, being on that oversight to hopefully hold some hearings and bring accountability to those that continue to steal our freedoms.
I want to talk about that because oversight is a role of the House, of course, and the legislature. And when you're talking about oversight, what I assume you mean is oversight over these various agencies that really seem to have control over our daily lives. It's not just the federal government. We talk about the bureaucratic state or the administrative state or the deep state. These bureaucracies are being run by these unelected individuals who seem to stay in office, make a boatload of money, and are really the ones who are making decisions on how you and I live. These are consequential, basically laws that are being created by unelected lawmakers that impact us. So when you talk about holding people accountable, where do you start with that, and what does that look like?
Well, when you talk about the unelected, I was asked on the campaign trail, what do I think the greatest threat to our system of law is? And I responded, the administration state, the ability to declare a state of emergency.
Yes.
Think about that. Our government is made up of three branches, but the Democrats and even some small group of Republicans are working very hard to create the fictitious administrative state. And we saw that during COVID. When our governor was held to account by our Constitution, what did she do? She declared a state of emergency, shifted powers to the administration state, the Department of Health and Human Services, and they were literally picking who should live and die, who should drive, who should make money, who should be able to go to church, all of those things. And to me, that was one of the things that really drew me to run, was to see Americans so willing to give up their constitutional freedoms. And so I truly feel called in this position to remind people of our constitutional freedoms and hold the administration state accountable.
Good, because I think there were so many, I guess you want to call them authorities that were involved in this. And for me, that included the news media. And we talk about this collaboration with the governor's office, the bureaucratic state. We have, in our state, would be the attorney general's office, the threats coming down from them, and the media very complicit in orchestrating this oppression. And so for a lot of people like myself, like I left the media because of this. This was the reason. And when I left, I went to another organization where I started to call out these issues that you just touched on. I mean, even the New York Times, a couple years after COVID or 3 years later, recognized that all of these mandates and these decisions to radically change our lives because it was going to save us didn't work.
Right.
They failed dramatically, and now we're, basically reaping the consequences of those decisions. And where I started to hold Governor Whitmer accountable for this and questioning her why she did all of these things with the information that I know she knew back in 2020, why did she still make these decisions? I was chastised again by the media outlet in which I worked. Right. So you can't do that.
Right.
I said so this has got to stop. And so that's the major reason why we're doing these like more independent programs, because you can't even trust the people you thought you could trust in this. So in this case, it comes down to the bureaucratic state in your world trying to fight against that kind of machine. That's a big machine. There's a lot of money behind it, and there's a lot of legislators in both parties who are, openly saying, yeah, we don't like the machine, but behind the scenes, they kind of do. Right. So what kind of challenges do you expect to face as you go into that?
Sure. Just as you had mentioned, the state budget in Michigan is $82 billion. That's with a B, 82 billion just for our state. And, I was listening to one of the lieutenant governors, and he was talking about the responsibility that we as new lawmakers have coming in. And he said there's approximately 149 people that run this state. And he said, and you're one of them. And the impact of that really hit me, and understanding that as big as this machine is, as big as the giant is, that I'm called to fight for that, and I'm called to fight for us. I did it by wearing a uniform in the United States Marine Corps, and now I'm going to do it in the Michigan State House. It's time for accountability, and we saw that in this last election. We saw it in the presidential election, from the State House to the White House. We saw a majority of Americans, liberal, Republican, Democrat, crossing aisles to vote and saying, I've had enough with government overreach, enough with overregulation, and trying to run my life. And so it's time for us as a legislature to put focus on holding hearings, on holding Dana Nessel accountable and others on what they did during COVID. We can't forget about it, because it very well could creep its way back in if we don't fight this time.
Yeah, Dana Nessel, just the overreach that even her office has now. I mean, she was making threats to legislators to put them in jail if they didn't show up to these sessions in the lame duck. Like she was going to arrest them and put them in jail for doing that. And so it's definite overreach and a stepping out of bounds of her office. It's a weaponization of, in this case, the Michigan
100%.
Department of Justice. So when you look at some of these things that have passed, Gretchen Whitmer, when she successfully in the last midterm in 2022 was able to get the House and the Senate the majority for the Democrats, she said, I am now going to step on the accelerator and push all these radical things through. She was pretty successful, as was, the Senate and the House, to get these things through. Many times in the dark of night, when not allowing many of the Republican counterparts to even read these bills before being forced to pass them. A few of those things are pretty radical. I think about, parental rights in education, and now there's 2 departments of education effectively in the state of Michigan. So when it comes to that, when you're thinking about parents and the decisions that they are supposed to be allowed to make on their own kids' education, by Michigan law, by the way, the parents are supposed to direct their kids' education. That's not really happening now, because we see in schools where they're being left out of the equation. Parents are, they're not being allowed to even see the curriculum, because they relabel curriculum as training or whatever they want to call it. So they don't have to show parents what's being taught in the classroom. Do you have any ideas and thoughts on how the new GOP, at least in the House, can try to implement some reforms to allow parents to once again regain control over their kids' education?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I was talking about earlier was that the government's not the parent to our children. And, one of the good things that came out of COVID was parents realizing and seeing what was being done to their children, right? Sexual education, so-called, instead pornography given to their children. I've said in the last year, I find it fascinating that we think we need to provide sex education, this training. I said people have been figuring out for thousands of years how to move our society along. But anyway, when you look at the overreach and them trying to get the government trying to homeschoolers, telling them they have to register their children with the state of Michigan. It all comes back to the Democrats' goal of taking and over-regulating and wanting to take more of our life to control it. And when you look at whatever the issues are, they can't even figure out how to fix the roads. I mean, that's a fundamental thing that we, regardless of party line, we need to have roads, and they can't even figure out a way to fix those.
Which is a core purpose of the government in Michigan, infrastructure, those kinds of things. But you brought up the homeschool issue. And, you can say, well, public schools have only gotten worse over the past, 4, 5, 6, 10 years. They keep getting worse and worse, and we're taking away these standards that teachers have to have in order to teach effectively our kids. But then they want to take over the homeschools effectively as well. And they're making this claim that, homeschools are dangerous, send them back to the public schools, where apparently public schools are safe, apparently. But how did that start? I know Dana Nessel, she came in and she says, I'm going to hold these homeschools accountable because that's where the abuse is taking place. And she used the whole foster care system as the reasoning for going in there. When in fact, the case that she cited, I don't want to get too bogged down in the weeds here, but the case that she cited to go after homeschools was the fact that these foster care parents were abusing their kids. Foster care system failed to properly vet. The state foster care
Right.
system failed, and they're blaming the homeschools, which had nothing to do with this.
Right.
What do you think over the overarching theme here? What is happening in the state? I mean, what is the ultimate goal for the Democrats? If they want to go after homeschools, they want everyone to go to public schools. They demonize charter schools. They demonize private schools and Christian schools. What is their end game, do you think?
Their end game is to continue to take the freedoms that we have that are hanging in the balance and continue to take those one bit at a time until we wake up and we realize, oh, I can't drive on the roads. I can't go to my work. I can't go to my church. That does seem radical, but that just happened a few years ago.
Right.
And I tell people all the time, whether you're a believer or you're not, I want to bring focus of that today. Think of this. Christians are the only ones that enter into the presence of their God through praise and worship.
Yeah.
No other religion. But what did our governor say? What did Dana Nessel say? They said, you can go to church, but if you go to church, you can't sing.
Yeah.
Okay, so think of that. That was a direct assault on Christianity, right? And you just see these continued attacks, just as you said. You can't get your own house in order, the public school. Why are you going to come into parents that are homeschooling or sending their kids to private school and try to get involved unless you're just trying to continue to steal our freedoms?
You brought up Christianity, and I didn't plan to bring this up, but I will, because yesterday we're coming off the heels of this terrorist attack in New Orleans, which was obviously perpetuated by a far left, radical Islamic extremist who is praising ISIS. And after that, I got a comment on my, X. I'll say his name because he's very public in his statements. His name is Joe Spalding. He ran for office, I think, in Ottawa County in the state of Michigan. And he told me that the biggest threat, the biggest terrorist threat in this country is the ideology that I hold, which is, I'm a Christian, Jesus Christ, and all the attributes, the biblical attributes of what that means. And to me, I respond like, you're talking about, okay, so I counsel people, hopefully, that they would restore their marriages, lead them out of anxiety and depression. And I'm completely opposed to any type of terrorist attack. And on the same day, you see these, far left progressive chanting again in New York City, praising the New Orleans terrorist. And they say this needs to happen more and more. And he's ignoring those threats, those real terrorist threats. Why do you think there is this belief out there that somehow Christianity, and they call it Christian nationalism, is somehow the real threat, terrorist threat to the United States of America?
Yeah. Well, Christianity brings an accountability to people, right? Other religions are, when you believe the way that we do as Christians, there's one true God, right?
Yeah.
And we get to him and through him, through the name of Jesus. But I find it interesting whenever I have people come and tell me about Christianity or Christians and they're willing to fight and yell and scream, I remind them, to your point of the terrorist attacks, why don't you go to some of these mosques and share your beliefs with them as well and scream at them and do that? Oh, no, you're afraid of what they would do to you, but you pick on people who, for the most part, are showing love and compassion, just as you said.
They're very kind.
It just shows you really that it's a spiritual issue, really.
It is, and I think what's happened is that they've relabeled hate speech as something that you are lovingly warning people about. Like these things that you're doing are going to ruin your life. That kind of thing now has become classified as hate speech, and that hate speech now has become a terrorist threat. I think they're relabeling and redefining all of these various issues. So you start on day one, January 8th. I don't know when you go to work, if it's that day and whatnot, but what do you hope to accomplish, and what would be your number one priority?
Yeah. Well, my number one priority is to be involved in the Oversight Committee We need to start day one of holding people accountable for the things that have happened. Just as you'd mentioned, these laws that they tried passing through, the ones they want to continue to push through, and holding people accountable, as we talked about earlier. And so day one, my goal is that I'm hopefully on that oversight committee to bring some fire and some fight for us as Michiganders. Also, the importance of shutting down that admin state, which comes under that oversight watch. Also caring for our veterans, because without them, we have nothing. Right? All of the freedoms that we have in this country come from those who are serving or served. And when you talk about an $82 billion budget, they have 2.5 million or around 3 million that's allocated towards our veterans out of $82 billion, which is a travesty. So I hope to chair and be a part of the Military and Veterans Committee, and my overall just standing for freedom and righteousness, and holding even my fellow lawmakers accountable on votes and things that we do.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and it should be noted that you're a Marine. You served valiantly, and you've been very involved in veterans' lives, and it's very difficult because of the PTSD that so many, and you've told me some stories in the past about some of the ramifications of war that these men and women, when they serve overseas, have to still endure all these years later. And it's a very difficult thing to do, and certainly a lot more funding should be going to our brave men and women who have served their country. Some of these laws that have been already passed, I don't know what you can do about them at this point. I mean, there's these, I know that the cage-free eggs is now, a big headline right now, because now Michigan cannot sell any eggs that don't come from caged-free chickens, which ostensibly is going to raise the price of eggs, which are already high. That's not but that's been in the works for many, many years. There's other things, like Governor Whitmer just signed a bill that landlords now, when they're trying to rent out an apartment or a house, they cannot identify the source of your income to ensure that you can pay the rent.
Right, which would be the equivalent of you or I or our listeners going to the bank and saying, I would like to take out a loan for $100,000, and they can't ask you how you're going to pay it back.
Right.
It's absolutely ridiculous. It's continued overreach. We see it with even the eggs you're talking about the cage-free law. We saw that this implemented in 2009 by the Democrats and some Republican support that got it across the board, which was unfortunate. And we knew that they were going to give them 10 years or so to get this on track. Well, now it's come to pass. A lot of those bigger companies have went and spent the money and did all of these things, and sources that I've talked to on both sides of the aisle are saying it hasn't made a difference. The sentiments and the emotions of the chicken, which is what pushed this, and PETA, which is totally absurd to me. I was thinking last night about this, that we have a party and some that are caring enough to force and push mandates, having businesses spend tens of millions of dollars because of the emotion of the chicken, possibly making the egg not as safe. But meanwhile, they have no problem mutilating our children through transgender mutilation, hormone therapy, or killing babies, which to me, something's out of order there. So
that's a whole nother major issue. Actually, I'll get your thoughts on that. The whole transgenderism in the schools and keeping that information away from parents. And why I've talked to senators, Democratic senators, who are saying we have to do this for our kids because it will protect them, when we know full well that the opposite is true. I've spoken to many detransitioners who were told the same things, and now they're 20, 22 years old saying, I was lied to, and now my life is ruined because I was told that transitioning to another gender would save me. It's only made me more depressed. It's only increased the suicidal ideations that I have. And we know that in the United Kingdom, we know that in Denmark and these other countries who have tried this, they've now reversed course because they've seen firsthand. We have these case studies in other countries. What ends up happening to these kids when they get to about 20, 21, 22 years old? What about that legislation? This is extreme. Is this something that you can fight to try to reverse?
Yeah, I wasn't going to mention it today, but I will.
Good.
Now the arrows begin to fly. My first bill that I've already put forward to LSB is to make transgender mutilation and hormone therapy for minors in the state of Michigan to be against the law. I'm told that this will be a long fight, a vicious one, one that my family and I will be threatened for. I've met with other lawmakers around the country who have implemented this in other states like Ohio and others. And to your point, I've had conversations with two women who transitioned to men, and they're willing, as they've already done, to come when we hold hearings on this and talk about how it has destroyed their life, not helped them, but destroyed it. And so for me, as a lawmaker, obviously I believe in fighting for people's freedoms.
Yes.
And as an adult, if you want to, with your own money, do whatever you want to do to yourself, that's between you and God. But our children, we have to protect them.
Yeah.
As you know, your brain as a male is not even formed till you're about 50. No, I'm just kidding. I think it's around 23.
Yeah. Mine just formed 4 years ago.
That's right. But the point is somebody's got to stand up for these children. And just very quickly, I was in Krakow in Poland and went to Auschwitz a few months ago. And I was in Block 11 where they did the experimental surgeries, and they had a picture of 4 little kids around 12 years old that they had blown up and for a reminder that the Nazis were doing experimental transgender mutilation surgery on these children. And I thought, my God, that is back alive, well again in the United States of America, and I'm going to stand for these kids. It was a promise that I made. I said on day one, I will file this bill, and I got to tell you, I lied because I've already filed it before I started it.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Great. I'm so glad to hear that. I'm glad you brought that up today because to me, this is a huge priority. Our kids' lives are at stake here. Wow, that's an incredible story. And Poland would go ahead.
And people don't realize, they say, well, how many people are going through this transgender process? The biggest one is the hormone therapy that they're on with these drugs. And so that's our goal, to stop that, to give people the right to, when they become an adult, to make a decision.
Planned Parenthood is very much involved in this as well because they see the profits, they see the money. We have a comment here we'd like to ask Representative Jason Woolford is from Jim Chikowski. Jim Chikowski is back. Tom, unfortunately, I'm not that confident that the Republicans will be all that we hope they could be. I would like to see a part-time legislature in the state of Michigan. Any thoughts to that from Jim?
Yeah, that's a mixed bag, right? So we've met with lawmakers from around the country at candidate forums, some full-time, some part-time. But I will say this, even in our 2-year terms that we have as House representatives, lobbyists lick and salivate their lips at that because they're always getting someone new, right? Consultants love it because they're always getting their next business. And therefore, it doesn't give a lawmaker the chance to get in and do the work they need to do. For instance, we're 2 years, right? I have to already start campaigning in a year from now when we should be focusing on the issues at hand. And so, as it relates at the state level or the federal level, part-time is that could be fascinating in getting things done.
It would be very difficult.
Yes.
And I, for one, I understand the sympathies, Jim, that you have there, but
100%.
It's a much more difficult job than we all realize, and it takes a lot more of our time. I think it's in many cases an 80-hour-a-week job that we just don't see because we only see them when they're in the chamber, voting on something. But there's a lot of work that goes behind the scenes as well.
Every single person that I talked to that was part-time said that they work full-time.
Yeah. That's just the reality of it. Yeah. It's about 80 hours. All right. Do we have another comment here for Representative Jason Woolford? Yeah, Walter Duro. Hey, Walter, how are you? How will Jason vote on toll roads camera tickets? That's a very great question. What do you think of that? Because now that toll roads are coming up, and people who live locally, like I think it's in Midland and that area, are saying I had to pay every time I go to where I work simply because of this new toll. Well, what do you think about toll roads? Is that something you would support?
At this point, with the knowledge that I have, I would not support that for the sake of you already pay tolls. It's called
Yes.
your income tax, your property tax, your
Exactly.
tax at the gas pump. The list goes on and on. We've already paid taxes for this. It's just a mismanagement of our money.
Right.
We look at the budget that was just 2 years ago, 50-some billion dollars, and now it's $82 billion a year. It went up $30 billion, and a majority of this was woke, over-regulating nonsense. And so we've just got to get things back in order, so we have to stop overtaxing our citizens.
We had a $9 billion surplus at the beginning of fiscal year 2024. That is gone.
I was gone in
happened?
2 months, I believe.
Yeah, it's done. It's just, and where did it go? I don't know, but I have a feeling some lobbyists might be involved in that as well. Walter, appreciate your comment. Thank you so much. I guess, I don't know. What about the sub? I'll ask you this final question, and then we'll let you go because you give me more time than you agreed to. So thank you for that. But subsidies, we're begging companies to come to the state of Michigan because we're over-regulating our businesses, both big and small. So we're offering some of them, the larger ones, hundreds of millions of dollars to come to the great state of Michigan and do business here. What are your thoughts about that and the MEDC?
Yeah, so, when you look at the MEDC, I think on both sides, and I may get in trouble for this, but I see this as a slush fund for governors, and it needs to be stopped.
Yeah.
End of story.
Amen.
For us to be able to take our taxpayer money and give it to a corporation to then incentivize businesses to come is ludicrous to me. We let the free market do what the free market does. Let's remove these regulations, remove the overtaxation, all of these restraints that we're putting on businesses, and the jobs that are going to Ohio, literally 45 from right where you and I are sitting.
Yes.
50 minutes from now, there are businesses that are moving to Ohio because of less taxes, less regulation, and we see it happening over and over again. And you look at the billions of dollars that's being invested, and what the outcome is unbelievable. I believe right now it's for every $200,000 that the MEDC does. As a matter of fact, I have it right here. I'll just read it.
Read it.
The MEDC and corporation subsidies in Michigan Economic Development Corporation get billions of our taxpayer dollars, and they do not fall under the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act.
See. This
This is a way for them to hide money and do things that isn't right, and it goes back to what we talked about, this over-regulation. Whether it be the eggs you're talking about, whatever it is, our farmers know best, not the government. Our industry, automakers know best, not the government. And we could go down the line. We just got to stop this overtaxation and regulation.
Yeah, and stop those non-disclosure agreements because that's even more difficult. Not to mention FOIA, but the NDA's got to stop as well. I'm so happy that you're in office, and it's been a long fight for you. But you're the guy that's qualified, a Marine, a wonderful missionary, really. Your ministry, what's it?
Mission Cry.
Mission Cry.
Yep.
People should look that up because it's a wonderful thing you're doing around the world with
$480 million worth of free Bibles and Christian books sent to 178 nations, absolutely for free to people.
Absolutely free. It's amazing, and you're generating them here locally, so it's wonderful. Jason Woolford, good to see you.
Glad to be here. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Appreciate you very much. So good to have you. So, all right, all this denying from Democrats over the past several years about these various crises that have been happening right before our eyes, whether it was that inflation wasn't real, that wasn't a real thing, or that Joe Biden was not mentally in major decline, or that the border wasn't open. All those things were so absurd at the time, but people were buying into this. And so now even the far left liberal pundit Chris Matthews says the Democrats are completely out of touch and not to be trusted. Watch this.
And I think that's it. And it's all about immigration and the economy. But immigration has been a terrible decision for Democrats. I don't know who they think they were playing to when they let millions of people come cruising through the border at their own will. Because of their own decisions, they came running through that border, and they didn't do a thing about it. And a lot of people are very angry about that. Working people especially, they feel that they've been betrayed. They feel that their country has been given away, and they don't like it. And I don't know who liked it. The Hispanics apparently didn't like it. They want the law enforced. And so I'm not sure they were playing to anything that was smart here in terms of an open border. And that's what it is, an open border. And I think it's a bad decision. I hope they learn from it. The economy, I think you can talk all you want about rates of inflation going down. What people do is they remember what the price of something was, whether it's gas or anything or cream cheese or anything else, and they'll say, I can remember when it was $2, now it's $7. And they remember in the last 5 years. That's how people think. Democrats don't know how people think anymore. They think about their country, and they think about the cost of things. And the working people figured, well, all these college kids, all the ones who went to elite universities, all looking down on us. Besides that, besides all this, we're getting condescension and deplorables and all that stuff. And they felt it, and they voted that way.
All right. You know what they did? And it's the same thing for Michigan Democrats as well. I mean, just look at a few things they pushed through that actually hurt people while those people are being gaslit as if these things aren't going to hurt you. And we've talked about, the cage-free egg law that's in the headlines a lot right now. The Michigan's new cage-free egg mandate driven by special interest groups imposes unnecessary cost on families by forcing retailers to sell only cage-free eggs. You might have seen the sign up at Kroger or at Meijer or wherever you shop for eggs. And they've already been transitioning in that direction. And the free market has kind of been leading the way on that. But now this government overreach disregards, basic economics. So it is likely to create price spikes and shortages that hit low-income families the hardest. The MEDC, Representative Woolford touched on this. One example of the subsidies they've been giving out, $600 million to General Motors. Michigan handed GM $600 million performance-based subsidies for EV plants before even any meaningful job creation or project completion was put into place. And the GM with this $600 million, they promised that there would be 1,360 jobs. There's only been 100 of those promised jobs delivered, and the payout became this taxpayer-funded windfall for General Motors, which is obviously this just highlights the dangers of this is corporate cronyism, if you want to talk about it. We hear a lot of people on the left say, oh, the corporate cronyism. Well, this is what it looks like when you got the government handing out hundreds of millions of your dollars to major high-profit corporations. So you're prioritizing that over accountability on fiscal responsibility. We wonder where that $9 billion surplus went that we had at the beginning of this year. And these landlord mandates, the new legislation that bans Michigan landlords from rejecting renters based on income sources like, government aid or whatever, wherever you get your money. I mean, how do you earn a living? Is it through marijuana sales or do you have a job at General Motors? What is it? Can't ask that question any longer. And so you're going to burden the property owners. It's going to fail to address the root causes of housing affordability. And these policies force private individuals to shoulder societal challenges that should be tackled through more broader, systemic solutions. And then you got these transparency delays. House Speaker Joe Tate, he delayed the Freedom of Information Act reforms, FOIA, for 5 months, which ultimately stalled the bills that would have extended open records laws to Michigan's legislature and the governor's office, but they don't want that. It's clear as day. Michigan remains only one of 2 states in the country that exempts these powerful offices from public records laws. It's a glaring failure of accountability. And then you got to shield the secret donors. There's, Tate, the speaker there, he was discouraging these bills that require disclosure of the secret donors to nonprofit fundraising accounts that are tied to lawmakers. Lawmakers can make these nonprofit organizations, the sole purpose is to raise a ton of money for them, but you can't disclose the donors of it. So this perpetuates this whole culture where dark money dominates public policy. It's a total lack of transparency. It betrays voters' trusts, undermines ethical governance and whatnot. So the point is that the new legislation starts on January the 8th, 5 days away from now. It's next week. We got to have more ethics bills that are actually implemented and not stalled by these Democrats. I don't know if much is going to get done because it's still going to be a divided government. But at least some of this radical extreme, agenda is not going to get through. The House will have a GOP majority, but the Senate will still have a Democrat majority. So at least things will get stopped. And that's why they try to run these things down our throats over the past few months in the lame duck session after the election. All right, want to take a couple more comments, and I'll get to some headlines here in a moment. Let's start off with, bring it up here. Cameron Harris is looking at it. It's Joe Spalding. The Michigan GOP can't even undo the damage done by the Michigan GOP. Okay, it's a very vague comment, which Joe Spalding is the one I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, who thinks that the biggest terrorist threat to this country is ideologies like mine, conservatives and Christians, and it was based on the terrorist attack that just happened in New Orleans by a supporter of ISIS, and ignoring all the chants on these university campuses to overthrow this government and kill people. And let's have the second revolution, the Intifada, killing people like they were doing in New Orleans, and they were celebrating it. Was it yesterday in New York? All these people came out, anti-Semitism, Palestinians, and all these progressive groups, progressivism, which Joe is a progressive, coming out and saying we want an intifada, is what they want. They want blood, and that's how they want to overthrow this government, through blood, and then get all these Jews out of the United States and Europe and just get them out. So this is what he's not speaking out against. And somehow Christian conservatives are the real threat here. Don't buy into that narrative. I've heard that time and again, and I can't see the examples that are so specific, and unless they're talking about, if you're saying, pornography in schools is hate speech, and that's the threat they're talking about, I don't see the threat. Anyway, so Joe Spalding's vague comment there about the GOP can undo the damage the GOP has done. I don't know what he's talking about, but the Michigan Democrats have overturned many, many different conservative laws that were put in by conservatives that have made our state far worse. And it's I think, led to a decrease in population that keeps getting worse and worse. All right, that's Joe Spalding there. You can chime in as well, anyone who wants to respond to that. We have another one here. Let's bring up, I think it's Walter is back. He agrees with Joe Spalding. Joe F. Spalding, right on. GOPs can't see the forest for the trees, or is it the other way around? Psych. Dude is giving his stump speech. Tom Jordan knows this, yet ignores that fact. Instead, co-signs a partisan legislatures, blah, blah, blah. He's not partisan, by the way. He just was saying that he was getting a ton of pushback from GOP. I don't know if you know Jason Woolford, but he's not your typical Republican. Walter, look into him. Listen, he's against all this spending and this, I know you're more of I don't know what I would call you, but you're not. I'm surprised you agree with Joe Spalding, because I don't know, Walter, if you see eye to eye with Joe on a number of things. You strike me more as, not I wouldn't say conservative, but definitely not a liberal. Like, you want there to be hardly any government involvement, and Joe Spalding would like more and more of it, more regulations on people's lives and livelihoods and speech and those types of things. Anyway, you seem to agree with the statement there. Listen, I also agree that the Republican Party is far from perfect. I am not a partisan either. In fact, I would say I'm more of an independent thinker, and I don't buy into a lot of talking points. Jason Woolford, he came in here and he believes what he says. I've known the guy for many years, far before he ever thought of getting into politics. And this is the life he leads based on these values that he holds. And sometimes they're going to butt against even the Republicans, but definitely the Democrats. So, Walter, I'm not sure what you're talking about there either, but yeah, I guess the GOP isn't perfect. I agree with that for sure. All right, let's bring, any more comments here, or is that about it for now? And let's bring one more, and then we'll do some headlines, and we'll go back to the final comments here. One more comment. Mike Jacobson, it's good to hear about Michigan's specific issues. If we can't get enough Republicans, and by that I mean MAGA, then the state will sink deeper into the cesspool. Please unscrew our state. Thank you, Mike Jacobson, for that. Yeah, we have a big problem in the state. There is such a far left trajectory and a shift towards Governor Whitmer and the Democrats so want to be California. And I don't know why. Because you can't, first of all, I don't mean like they want to be on the coastline, because you can't do that. You can't be on the ocean. You can be on a lake. We have great lakes here, and I think a beautiful coastline in the state of Michigan. You can't be California in terms of their geography. But you can be like California if you're talking about their political mandates that have ruined that state economically and socially. And they're very oppressive. And that does seem to be how the Michigan Democrats want to be. And Jason Woolford and other Republicans like him, they want just civil individual liberties. It doesn't matter if you're Christopher or if you're Walter or you're Joe, you should have your rights to say your piece. And people should be able to have their rights to oppose your opinion and go back and forth on this without the threat of being imprisoned. And that is what more and more, I mean, you look at Canada, what's happening there. California is a step below Canada right now, almost on its way. And then Canada is just a step below the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom, you can definitely get arrested for things you're thinking about, not even saying. Or if you have a prayer in your head that someone found out you prayed something silently in your own head, you can go to prison for that. That is what it seems this far left liberal side of the Democratic Party wants to do in Michigan, in California, and seemingly by the support of people who are gaslighting us again, saying none of that is really happening when we know it is. We know it is. Speaking of Michigan and what's happened to the state, there's a population decline the decline is rapidly increasing. And so now what the state of Michigan is doing is relying on international immigration amid the exodus of domestic residents. And by international, I also include the illegal immigrants that they want to legalize in the state. So Michigan's population is struggling to stay afloat as there's new census data that highlights this troubling trend that the state ranks 49th now. It used to be 38th right there. Oh, that's the income there. But it ranks 49th in population growth. Like we're next to last. And it's driven almost entirely by international migration. We're talking about any growth in the state is almost entirely because of people coming into this country from other countries. So between 2020 and 2024, Michigan added 96,680 residents, but the growth masks this deeper issue that the state lost 67,785 domestic residents during that same period. The international migrants added 164,000. So it's a stark contrast, underscoring this exodus of families and workers. So no, I'm not opposed to migrants. We all come from migrant. We all are ancestors, or maybe you're a first generation migrant. Congratulations. Of course, we have to say this ad nauseum. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the illegal immigration and why even Chris Matthews admits why the Democrats are so supportive of illegal immigration and having an open border that allows millions and millions and millions of people who are not allowed in this country to come into this country. And then to get driver's licenses in the state of Michigan, to get jobs, to get health care funded by taxpayers. Why is that allowed to happen? And they're out of touch. So we have low birth rates in the state of Michigan. We have a very unfriendly business environment. All of that compounds the problem. Michigan's natural population loss, driven by the declining births, increased abortions, rising deaths. There are more deaths than births in Michigan. Policies, meantime, like, repealing right-to-work laws, which is something the Democrats did, Joe Spalding. That wasn't a Republican thing. That hurts the state of Michigan. Right to work, the repealing those right to work laws. Right to work, your right to work how you see fit and who you want to work for was something Republicans put in. It was just repealed by this Democratic Party over the past 2 years. Burdensome regulations, that has all deterred investment in the state. Businesses and families have been prompted to seek opportunities elsewhere. So you look at neighboring states like Ohio. They have a more balanced policy approach. They continue to attract new residents. They've added more than 83,000 since 2020. And then you look at the state's high school graduation rate. That's projected to plummet 20% by 2041. People graduating from high school, plummeting 20% by 2041. Further economic challenges are ahead for us. And experts are warning that a shrinking workforce, stagnant income growth, will exacerbate Michigan's economic problems that we're seeing right now. It's not going to get better unless something radical changes. And hopefully that's what this new iteration of the House begins, that process. It is going to be a long fight. International migration is temporarily stabilizing the population numbers, temporarily, but it doesn't address the underlying flight of the domestic citizens, the people from Michigan who are leaving the state. And this is a critical issue for a state striving to reclaim its once vibrant economic legacy. All right, I want to talk a little bit about the New Orleans terrorist that was killed during that terrorist attack. Pretty chilling revelation. Photos from inside Shamsud Din Jabbar's Houston trailer home expose a pretty sinister world of extremism. Jabbar was the New Orleans terrorist, that's him right there, who left 14 dead on Bourbon Street. He maintained this bomb-making station amidst this disheveled collection of chemical containers, a lot of chilling personal artifacts in his home in Houston. That dominates the room that where he lived. There was a Quran in there, was open to a passage in the Quran invoking violence in the name of Allah. A lot of extreme ideology that was just strewn about his room where he lived in Houston. Jabbar is a former Army staff sergeant. He turned it, professional. He had he meticulously recorded his journey into radicalism. So it's there for people to learn about. He had a series of Facebook videos. He confessed in those allegiance to ISIS. He displayed his will and detailed his intentions in this. And then hours later, his Ford F-150 bearing the ISIS flag became that weapon of carnage that he seemed to revel in and enjoy. And investigators were combing through his digital footprint, found really no evidence of external assistance. He may have been a lone wolf in this. He could have been, which if he was, he did a lot of damage. He's got a past. It's marked by military service. He had a successful career, but some personal turmoil in his life. Not a lot of clear warning of his descent into extremism. There were some people, I think some neighbors who thought he was a nice guy. But his home was steeped in jihadist symbols, from Qurans and passages in the Quran to his tactical gear that was strewn about his home. Again, the neighbors are describing him as kind of seemingly an ordinary dude. He very effectively masked his dark reality. So that's just an update on who he was. The now deceased terrorist in New Orleans. All right, the new year opens with, today's a big day, high-stakes drama as House Speaker Mike Johnson braces for a nail-biting vote to retain his gavel in the 119th Congress, a slim GOP majority. Johnson's facing mounting pressure from conservatives that are frustrated by his handling of government funding and spending cuts. So today's vote, it promises to showcase probably some rare moments of raw political tension. C-SPAN cameras are going to be capturing all of this, allowed on the House floor for the public to witness every twist and turn. If you want to watch it via C-SPAN, you can do that. Mike Johnson, despite receiving, President-elect Donald Trump's full endorsement, can only afford one Republican defection to maintain his position. And Representative Tom Massey, he's a Republican of Kentucky, has already pledged to oppose him. Others are remaining non-committal. So if it's just Massey, he can get through. But if one joins Massey, that's it. So it's a pivotal moment. And Johnson even acknowledged that yesterday. He said that they're poised to deliver on the America First agenda with unified government. Hoping that's the case. I prefer to see him in there just to get, this initial part through. And it's the first 100 days of Donald Trump's presidency are going to be critical. If you stall things with this impasse, who are you going to get to replace him with a majority vote within the GOP? I don't know. I don't know who's going to be better and who's going to be more unifying than Mike Johnson. And he is a strong conservative. I know it doesn't seem like it with some of these economic policies and whatnot, but it's going to be a bit of a slow push to undo what the Democrats have done and what Republicans have done for so long. Get to the point where they have no longer a budget deficit. They start voting on individual, get rid of these omnibus packages and start voting on individual pieces of economic legislation. Hopefully they get to that point, hopefully sooner rather than later, but it takes time sometimes to do that. There are a lot of cracks in the GOP. The unity, if you want to call it that, are pretty glaring. Conservatives like Chip Roy, Republican out of Texas, he's criticized Johnson's, recent reliance on Democrats to pass that spending bill. And he's been accused of, Johnson as a failing to communicate and plan effectively. So there's definite some chinks in the chain, I think, regarding his. So we don't know what's going to happen yet today. Hopefully it doesn't turn into a Kevin McCarthy situation. All right, those are some of your headlines here. Let's get some comments, maybe some questions here. Let's bring them up. We got two, I think, I want to get to before we had to say so long because we're getting out of time. Mark Miller, the split government is going to keep them from changing the minimum wage and paid sick leave law that will close 20% of service businesses. Our governor will never sign off on changing this bad law. The outside money that started this, one fair wage. Yeah, one fair wage. You look into their organization. Ended up in the Supreme Court, who then made up their own rules of the law. It's just unbelievable. You're right about that. The Supreme Court stepped in as a legislative body, and they rewrote it to interpret it the way they think it should have been interpreted, and then rewrote it in that vein. This should be the number one item on the floor. Mark says, you think $5 eggs are bad? Wait till this law goes into effect on February 21st. You're right. This is a big deal. You're right. 20 restaurants are going to they're going to go out of business. They cannot afford this. And a lot of servers don't want it either. They're going to make less money under this whole guise that these Democratic legislatures want to help them. They're not. They're hurting them. They rather make the tips. Tips are going to go down as well because people are fed up. There is a rise in the cost of living. There's only so much that people can afford. And if they find out that waiters and bartenders and servers are making more in Bellman and hotels, they're making more an hour now, quite a bit more, then they're going to say, well, there's less need of a tip for them. I don't feel that they need it as much as they used to. So you're right about that. Good point. We'll see what happens there. One more comment. Harry Sakalian. Hey, you're back. Hi, Tom. Hi, Harry. As a resident of the free state of Florida, formerly of Milford, Michigan, Milford's a great town, isn't it? Although it's become very difficult to live there because of the high cost of living in Milford. But you go on to say, the part-time state legislator works well. Regards, Harry Sakalian. He's down in Florida. Florida knows what they're doing down there. So, okay, I'll take your word for it. Harry, always good to hear from you. Appreciate it so much. Thank you for watching once again and being a part of the program. We will be back Monday, same time, 9 a.m. streaming live. TomJordanLive.com. We're on YouTube, X, Facebook, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Until Monday, have a great weekend. God bless you.